Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil. I love when I get a nice mic because then I can hold it up. And if you ever see anyone like this, that's a mistake. I learned early on in my career, after about 150 talks a year, you really learn just to put it right here. And just that's why everyone can really understand what you're saying. So let me know if I fall down because sometimes I get a little scared. But I think it's going to be pretty awesome. How many went to Signal last year? The first one. A few. Did anyone go to my talk last year? One, perfect. Two, we got two coming back. All right, come back for more. So today I'm really excited. I got to work on an awesome demo, and I'm good friends with everyone here at Twilio. And I work really hard with one of the developer evangelists, Brent Schooley, who's been a longtime friend, and he works really hard on integrating the Twilio SDKs with Xamarin. And today I'm going to go over everything with Xamarin. How many of you know what Xamarin is? Quite a few. Perfect. How many are using Xamarin technologies? All right. So cool, perfect. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of exactly how Xamarin works. There's a few new people in the room, and then I'm going to show you how you can develop beautiful cross-platform apps with Xamarin across iOS and Android and Windows, but how to integrate the Twilio SDKs into your applications. So this is me. I'm James Montemagno, developer evangelist at Xamarin. I live in this beautiful, sunshiny city, just like it is here today, but Seattle, Washington. It's lovely. I moved there from Phoenix because I thought, what better place, what sunnier place than Seattle, Washington? Coming from 360 days of sun a year to 2 was a big change, but it was okay because the streets flow of coffee, and that warms your heart and soul. So it's pretty much awesome. And that's what I do there is I live there, I drink a lot of coffee, but when I'm not drinking coffee, I'm creating mobile apps and mobile libraries. It's my passion. It's what I love to do every single day. The best part of my job as a developer evangelist is that I'm a developer. I've been crafting cross-platform applications with Xamarin for the last 5 years across iOS, Android, and Windows. I've shipped more than 70 applications across the different platforms. And every single thing that I do is completely open source on my GitHub page. You can find me directly at james@xamarin.com if you have any questions, or Mott's Codes, that's my fancy blog, and of course Twitter and GitHub at James Montemagno. Anytime, anything you need, just let me know. So when you think of Xamarin, a lot has changed over the last few months, especially if you've been a Xamarin developer, because we've always wanted to be your complete mobile solution. And then when Xamarin or Microsoft acquired us, or we acquired Microsoft, a lot changed and a lot got better. So I'm going to go over those changes, but we've always talked about this develop, which is inside of Visual Studio or Xamarin Studio, crafting beautiful cross-platform iOS, Android, and Windows apps, all in C# or F# or VB.NET, whatever your flavor of .NET is, we're there for you. We focus on C# heavily. But when you think about crafting applications, whether you're doing it today in Xamarin or not, you need to think about your entire DevOps, if you will, of how am I going to get this into users' hands? How am I going to test my applications? How am I going to monitor it? So you think about the testing part, we can test our business logic with NUnit or XUnit, but what about the user interface? We created Xamarin UI tests in the Xamarin Test Cloud, which is over 2,300 unique iOS and Android physical devices that can run any application written in any language, whether it's Java, Objective-C, Cordova, or Xamarin, to test your user interface. So you can tap a button, scroll, tap on your list, enter some text, and then you can get real-time feedback of how your application is running on those different physical iOS and Android devices. But of course, you need to build your applications too. You can run those tests, Test Cloud completely free locally. Maybe you want to build it in CI. We work with tons of great companies like Bitrise, but we also have our own build server called Visual Studio Team Services, which is a very long name to say that it builds a bunch of stuff and ships it anywhere. So you can put your Xamarin, your Cordova, any of your applications right into Visual Studio Team Services for free and get them up there. And you can even just put it at a GitHub repository and it'll build with every single commit. Of course, after you ship your application, you want to make sure that your users are getting them, but also that you're monitoring. We have Hockey App, which is a single way to distribute your applications to any of your testers and give them real-time way of giving you feedback, but also monitoring your applications for crashes and session usage and events. So that's kind of Xamarin, the entire Xamarin solution. So it's not just building your applications, it's the full stack. We're going to talk about heavily developing applications where Xamarin really sticks out. Well, the fancy animation I did there. All right. So when I started mobile development 5 years ago, my boss came and told me, he's like, James, we're going to CES in 2 months, and we need an iOS, Android, and a Windows application. They all got to be native, they got to be beautiful, and you got 2 months, go. I said, okay, that sounds good. You know, I'd written one mobile app for Windows Phone, and that was about it. Java, Objective-C, I didn't know. But what something stuck out to me is that he said, hey, we need a native application. What does that mean? So when you're building applications, you want to make sure you're giving a great native experience and integrating great native platform features. So of course we want our user interfaces to look and act like they should on the different platforms. If you're an iOS user or Android user, they should look and feel like an Android or iOS application. Of course, you want access to every single API inside the SDK. So if you want to add some really cool functionality like iBeacon or Map or AirPlay or something like that, you should have access to it. And as developers, we want access to everything. And of course, your apps just has to be super fast and they have to perform really well. You want a great native experience. So how do you get there? We know what we want. And when I started 5 years ago, I didn't know how to get there, but now I do now. First, I thought I was going to go down this route, which was go learn Objective-C or Swift. Well, it was Objective-C only in that time, with Xcode and learn the beautiful tools of Xcode. And then I was going to all right, lowercase a bunch of things and write a bunch of Java code and run Android Studio, or at that time Eclipse, everyone's favorite IDE. And then I was going to be happy and run my Windows application here in C# inside of Visual Studio, which is my IDE for over a decade now. Now, silo approach is like what a lot of development teams are doing. They're building up 3 times, 3 different languages, 3 different test cases, integrating the feature 3 different times. This gets very expensive really fast, multiple people managing it. You have all these different environments. So then you say, okay, well, what if I just wrote all my code once and just put it into this magic app generator box thing and then boom, apps. I'm pretty sure that's what my parents think I do, like code and then apps. Boom. That's what we do, right? Just apps. They come out of nowhere. It's great. File new, boom, now you got a great app. Now, the problem here is that there's a lot of different frameworks out there. A lot of times this is some JavaScript, HTML, CSS going into this thing, popping out some iOS apps. Sometimes they kind of look okay on Android and never look good on Windows. So you got to write a bunch of custom CSS and you're like, oh man, now I'm writing all this code. And then you're like, oh, now I need to add that specific functionality. I hope someone abstracted that for me, or now I'm going to go write the Objective-C or Java code. And since a lot of times these things are running in a browser, you're never going to get that great performance. So Xamarin is completely different. We leverage a shared C# backend for all of your mobile applications, iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac. Wherever you want to run it, this is all your business logic, models, view models, RESTful service calls, SQL databases, anything that is common across the different platforms. Right? This all in C# with all of .NET available to you. Then we give you the tools to craft out a beautiful iOS, Android, and Windows user interface right inside of Visual Studio. Best yet is that we give you 100% native API access. So anything that is available in the iOS or Android or Windows SDKs are available to you as a developer. We take them and we create C# bindings around every single API, and we add C# features like async await, lambdas, links, delegates, events, things that we know and love as a C# developer. So even though we're accessing a native API, we're doing it all in C# with C# features. What I love is that everything is compiled down to a native application running natively on the actual platform. We take your C#, compile it down into IL, down into LLVM bytecode, run that iOS code all through an LLVM compiler and optimizer, and boom, native ARM binary running natively. All of your C#, all of your iOS code, everything is in a beautiful iOS application. We can leverage the craziness of Android and run our mono runtime, which is our original open source implementation of .NET, side by side the Dalvik or Art runtime, and you're getting great performance with our super fast just-in-time compiler. Cool. So to your users, there's no difference. They go to the App Store, download an app, boom. In fact, you downloaded the Twilio conference app that was built in Xamarin. You just downloaded an app, right? You just downloaded an app. That's all it is.
Windows?
It's iOS and Android, I think. I don't think you guys did a Windows one. Now, the Evolve conference application, which is completely open source, is iOS, Android, and Windows 10. So we'll see if they're going to open source. I don't know. So we also have great up-to-date support. This was my fear 5 years ago, picking a platform. You're like, where's it going to go? Well, we've been acquired by Microsoft, so it has a very good future ahead of us. And Xamarin is staying Xamarin, which is really cool. It's the number one question is Xamarin staying Xamarin? Absolutely. But we've been shipping same-day support for iOS, including all of our documentation, all of the SDKs, everything. So when a new platform comes out, you're good to go. When it comes to Android, it's a little bit different. Google sometimes, or in the past, will say, here's a new version, here you go. Recently, they've been very good about big developer previews. We had near same-day support for L and M, and we actually just released our brand new preview support for Android N preview 2. It's our second preview, so we're up to date on that. But of course, you want to take your applications everywhere, not just phones and tablets. Maybe you want to go to Apple TV, Apple Watch, Google Glass, Android Wear, Amazon Fire devices. Anything you want to go, you have an SDK available for you. Now we have 2 great IDEs. I'm going to do everything here on my PC inside of Visual Studio, but maybe you're on a Mac. We have Xamarin Studio, which is a beautiful IDE for doing iOS, Android, and Mac development. The same solutions, same projects open in both IDEs, so no matter where you're developing or where your developers are developing their applications, same projects, same solutions. Beautiful part now is that when Microsoft bought us, they said, we're going to make everything free. So they did, and that was awesome. So now Xamarin is completely for free, whether you have MSDN or not. It's included in Visual Studio, including the free Visual Studio Community Edition, and it's feature-rich. Everything they can do, there's no restrictions, anything like that on the size. You're just good to go. So there's no reason not to be crafting great applications with Xamarin. It's free. So truly anything that you could do in Objective-C, Swift, or Java, you can do it in C# in Visual Studio with Xamarin. To the fact that if you have a great Objective-C, Swift, or Java library, you can create your own C# versions of those. And that's actually what we do with the Twilio SDKs. We also, at the same time, open sourced everything too. So our Mono, our Xamarin iOS, Android, Xamarin Forms, everything is open source. You can learn all about our open source initiatives at open.xamarin.com. And what's really cool is if you're building embeddable devices or a game engine or something like that, you can take our Mono, our amazing Mono runtime, and embed it inside of anything that you want to do. It's all under MIT, which is really awesome. Cool. So last year I was at Signal, and a few of you were in my session, and I introduced the 5-minute meeting. I thought meetings were terrible to schedule. You got to go inside an app. You got to do this thing. I built this little application to read all my contacts. I click on one, and I schedule a meeting immediately with just 2 button clicks. And then what I did is I enabled that with Twilio to send text messages and 1 click, do a phone call right through the application. I ran that live on stage at Signal between iOS and Android, all from shared code, which is really cool. Still open source on my GitHub. It's embedded in this Office 365 thingy. It's on some special tree, but it's totally there and it's really awesome. And that puppy was all developed using the Twilio client for Xamarin, which is enabling the voice over IP and SMS, all the text messaging features that you may be used to. But I thought this year at Signal, I didn't want to reuse the same old. I wanted to do something new, something fresh. So I wanted to introduce a brand new application that I spent a lot of time making, which is Monkey Chat. Because monkeys like to chat too. So I thought it'd be really cool to, of course, power all of this by IP messaging in the Twilio SDK. So I'm going to run this live, and we're going to talk about how I'm going to build it at the same time. And how we're going to build it is a little bit different than last year. Last year, I built everything the traditional way, iOS storyboards, Android XML files. But since then, a lot has changed too. We introduced Xamarin Forms, which is our cross-platform user interface library. It sits on top of Xamarin and abstracts away common UI elements into a shared library. So not only are you sharing your backend, but also your front-end code too, all in XAML. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what that is, and then we're going to dive into some code, and we're going to build a chat application in just a few minutes with Twilio. So we talked about kind of the traditional approach, is how I built the 5-minute meeting application. So shared C# backend, models, view models, and then crafted a user interface on top. Xamarin Forms can leverage that same user interface, or the same shared C# backend, so all that business logic. But we have that Xamarin Forms UI layer on top of it, so it sits on top of the Xamarin platform. But then you get access to every single API at the same time. So Xamarin Forms does a lot. It's not just a shared UI layer. Of course, it has 40+ pages, layouts, and controls that we can access from XAML, and of course bring in two-way data binding, but also has a navigation API, an animation API, a dependency service, and even a messaging center, kind of everything you need to get started building applications all from shared code. So we have a few pages and layouts that you have access to, and you can customize anything you want. So things like master detail, tabbed pages, carousel pages, and layouts such as stack, absolute, content view, scroll view, and you can mix and match all these together. Then we have tons of controls. So we've abstracted everything that essentially is the same across iOS, Android, and the Windows platform. So things like buttons, labels, editor, maps, sliders, as much as we could create them as a common UI toolkit. Of course, though, you can always add your own and create your own. There's tons of amazing developers like Syncfusion and Telerik and a bunch of other amazing control vendors that are building UI controls for Xamarin Forms and Xamarin, but also you can build your own and you can customize any of them. So what this looks like, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, maybe from the back, but we're going to zoom in and do some real stuff. So let's say I was building a login page. I have a few text entry fields, and then I have a button on the bottom. So down here I have a stack layout, 2 entry fields, and a button. The button has a green color, and then it has a login command. So this is the same XAML user interface, and on iOS, we can see it's all wrapped in a tab page up top. So there's 2 tabs. Up on the bottom on iOS, we get tabs on the bottom inside of a tab controller with icons and text. On Android, user interface on top and a pivot control on Windows. Of course, you're on Windows 10, it'll look a little bit different if you're on desktop or phone. But we're getting the exact same styles that you would expect on Android and iOS and Windows because it's laying down the native controls. Even though you're coding against the Xamarin Forms button, it's still laying down a UI button, an Android widget, and a XAML control over on Windows. So it's the native user interfaces that your users are expected. So how we're building this Twilio application and this Monkey Chat application is we're going to leverage the fact that we have a shared C# backend, but we can also build a C# server, and you can run that on Linux or Mono or the core CLR. I've decided to run the Twilio server on Azure. It was just really easy. I just deployed an Azure website, and it's running the Twilio .NET SDK. And that's it. And if you wanted to, what's really cool is that since everything's in C#, everything's .NET, you can also share logic between your mobile apps and your front end. Oh, and your back end, I should say. All right. So before we jump into code, the brand new released Twilio IP messaging SDK is available, and that's what we're going to leverage, and that's how we're going to build out the iOS and Android SDK, all from some shared code. So let's build some Monkey Chat application, and I did not make this beautiful logo. I had our designer make it because I could, even though it's like a circle and it looks like a monkey, because it is a monkey, I can't even do that because I'm a developer. All right, cool. So I'm going to jump over, I'm right here still, and I'm going to jump over really quick into Visual Studio. All right. Now, normally, if you've never gotten started with Xamarin before, you'd say a new project, and when you install Visual Studio 2015, you can just install Xamarin at the same time. If you have older versions, 2012 or 2013, or have already installed 2015, you can go to xamarin.com, download our universal installer, and you'll be good to go. And when you do that, you'll see brand new things like an Android application, so blank apps, Android Wear, OpenGL, iOS applications like Apple Watch, extensions, iPad, the different platforms that you would expect, or cross-platform. So cross-platform is how we're actually going to go in, and you would lay down an iOS, Android, and a Windows application, and you can do that either with the native, traditional user interfaces, or from Xamarin Forms. So these are some blank applications. So I've already started building out the Monkey Chat applications. I'm just going to go ahead and open up the solution. This application will be open source after the session. I'm going to strip out a few things so you can build some stuff up. And I made the text huge. It's absolutely huge because, can everyone see that in the back of the room? Few good, yeah. Not only did I set it to the largest font possible in Visual Studio, but then I maximized it by 115. So perfect. All right, so this is going to do some things. And I have a lot of things open. So let's go ahead first and close all these pages. And let me show you the project structure really quick of this application. So over here, we have a full Android, iOS application, and a portable class library. This is where I'm going to share all my code. If I look inside this and drop down some of these folders, we can say I have some things like custom cells. I have our Twilio Messenger helper. I have some models, view models, and views. So I have 2 pages, essentially like a welcome screen to connect to a chat room, and then the main actual chat application room where I'm actually doing live chatting. So the first thing that I've done here is we can see, if I go ahead and right-click on the solution, is I wanted to bring in the Twilio SDKs. We do this all through NuGet package managers, which is essentially kind of like CocoaPods or like your Maven here. And what we can see is that I have right here the Twilio Common for Xamarin and Twilio IP messaging for Xamarin. Now, the Twilio SDK currently doesn't have a cross-platform API, so I crafted it myself. This gives you basically everything in Twilio that you would know and expect. But what I said is, you know what? I only need a few functions from Twilio. I need to essentially initialize and connect to a chat room, and then I need to send it a message and then get notified whenever I actually receive a message from another user. So that's going to be my API. So if I actually dive into the Android and iOS applications, there's not tons of code that I had to write specifically for these applications. We can see here there's like a Twilio Messenger, a main application, main activity. There's only about 100 lines of code in the iOS and Android application. Everything else is shared. So if I open up the Twilio Messenger, this huge font, we can see that I have an iTwilio Messenger client, and I implement a few interfaces here. And this is just a bunch of boilerplate code. I'm actually going to go ahead and just make it 100 and see if we can fit a little bit more on the screen. But we have this nice API to check if it's initialized. I can initialize the SDK. I'll go ahead and, when I call this method, it's async await. So I can actually go ahead and set up here, and I'll load all my channels, and I'll try to connect to the general channel. And whenever anything changes in the general channel, I get notified. So if we scroll a little bit further down, I have a way of just simply joining the general channel. Else I'm going to create it and then join. But the big part is down here, is when I actually want to send a message. So I'm in my general channel, I have my messages, and I send a message. I pass it the message via text. And then down here, whenever a member joins, I just pop up some toast. Or what I can do is I can parse the message. So what I do down here is whenever a message comes in, if I have anyone that's listening and is expecting a message to come in, I simply pass it up and I invoke that. So it's kind of like an event that I'm listening to from my shared code. That's just for Android. It's not too much, about 100 lines. On iOS, I do kind of the same thing. It's actually a little bit less code, but I'm tying into the actual Twilio SDK. We can see down here I have a little bit of initialized code, and we can see I'm getting this token from our Twilio Helper. I'll talk about that in a second. This here is done on iOS and Android, and that's from shared code. I go ahead and do the same thing. I join the channel, I go ahead and subscribe, and then I can down here simply send a message, very similar. And then whenever one comes in, I'll simply parse it out and add it and invoke that method. So very similar code between the two. There's some ways to even get that a little bit better. From rumors, talking with some of the people here at Twilio, we're actually going to make this a fully cross-platform API, and I'll update the sample as the SDK evolves. So that's kind of my platform-specific code. That's all I had to write in iOS and Android. Of course, if I wanted to, you could see I could come up and I could say, you know, using core audio, core Bluetooth, any of the iOS applications. So maybe I wanted to, you know, do a ding or something like that. Every time a message comes in, I could do that with core audio. All right, so let's actually write a little bit of user interface inside of here. So what I'm first going to do is come into my model, and we can see I have this model. This is in shared code. So I have text, I have a date timestamp that I want to display, I want to know if it's incoming, and I want to know if there's an attachment or not. Maybe I want to display an image that's maybe coming in via the messaging API. So the very start point of my application is this little view model that I have, and it has one command. So when I click a button, it's going to connect. We see here I have the Twilio Messenger interface that I've abstracted. And then here, it's very simple. So now in my shared code, whenever I click a button to connect, I'm going to initialize async. As long as I get access and I join the general chat room, I'm simply going to display an alert, and then I can push a new page, which is the main chat page. So I open up this rooms XAML here. What we can see is that there's really nothing crazy special. It's just some XAML, all in shared code. Inside of here, I have a image. That's a logo. And then I have a button that says connect to general. And I have a connect command, so that's the code behind there. And then inside of here, I have a stack layout that is just going to do a little connecting indicator. Now, what we want to write out really quick is our live chat room. So inside of our chat room, I have an observable collection of messages, and that's what I want to actually go ahead and trigger every single time and bind that into a list. I want to enter some text, so an outgoing text message. And then I have a send command. So just a few things inside of here. And we can see here whenever I get a message from the Twilio Messenger, I'm going to add it to my list. The user interface will be notified. And then down here, whenever I hit the send command, so click a button, it's going to take our text in the outgoing message, it's going to send it and pass it on to Twilio's backend. So let's build that user interface. I'm going to go into my main chat page here. I have a little bit of XAML set up here. But we can see I have a grid. So the first grid is going to be this big row. It's going to be a big list view of messages. And then down here, I want to put in some entry, text entry. So I'm going to go ahead and what we're going to do is build this up, and we want to add a list view into the equation. So we're going to go ahead and add a list view. Here we go. And I'm going to give it a name, and we're going to call it messages list view. When I do that, that'll enable me to access it from the code behind. We're going to add in an items source, and this is going to be a binding to our messages. There we go. Now, I want to actually go ahead and do a few other things. I want to say, well, we don't know how big that text message is going to be, so I'm going to say that it has uneven rows. And I'm also going to say, usually in a text message application, there's no little separator in between the text messages. And then lastly, we need to describe what each cell is going to look like. Over here, I've already created 2 cells. I have an incoming and an outgoing message view cell. And I can use an item template selector, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. But all I need to know is that I'm going to put an item template inside of here, and I'm going to say static resource. And I'm going to go ahead and just bind that right here to this guy. There we go. That's going to be our list view. Then what I'll do is down here I have a stack layout. So we're going to stack a few things horizontally. I have a little background color in here. So let's just simply say entry. So it's going to be a little entry field. And I'm going to do a text binding here to outgoing text. And then I'm going to say horizontally, let's make sure that we fill and expand, make sure it goes all the way across as much as possible. And let's give it a little height of 25. And let's give it a little placeholder text. And we'll say add message. There we go. And then we're going to have a button. So a button, just actually go ahead and put it in there. We'll say button. And our text here will be send. And then we want to actually make that command. So that'd be binding to send command. There we go. And that's our user interface, shared across iOS and Android, and it's all in XAML. So this item template selector, essentially I have a few different cells, and all this does inside of here is loads them up, and it says, is it incoming? Then return the incoming. If it's outgoing, do the outgoing. And that's it. There's one more thing I need to do in my code behind of this main chat. And I've spiced it up here, and I said whenever I get a new message, simply go ahead and we'll say, is that message list view? I think that's what I made it. See what I made it here, yeah, messages list view, perfect. There, perfect. I said, hey, just scroll to the bottom. So we're scrolling. So now here's what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna build up our application. First on Android, then I'll do it on iOS. Make sure everything compiles, make sure I actually wrote everything correctly. And what this will do is it'll just build everything right on my PC. And I have the Visual Studio Android emulator that Microsoft released. It's powered to Hyper-V, it's really fast, I love it. We're just gonna go ahead and spin this up over there. So this will build up our APK, and it'll get ready, and it'll build up our user interface, and Monkey Chat will be ready to go. Oh, but of course I want to show one more thing, which is that Twilio Helper. You're like, James, how are you connecting? Where's the Twilio server? Well, the Twilio server, like I said, is running on Azure. So all I do here is I initialize async, I get my token. So it's a little bit of shared code that goes off and it hits the Azure website, gets the token. It's essentially the boilerplate sample from the Twilio GitHub repository. And I use JSON.NET to simply deserialize all asynchronously the JSONs coming back to get the identity and the token. Super simple. Both iOS and Android are calling that code. So here's our Monkey Chat application. It's beautiful. I have a nice little logo. But of course, we have a chat application. So let's actually go ahead and spin this up on iOS. There we go. I've set the iOS as my startup project. So that's why I have a Mac here. You have to have a Mac somewhere on your network to kind of deploy and do stuff. But we recently just released our iPhone simulator for the PC. So instead of me having to switch back and forth to the PC and Mac, I just hit deploy. And hopefully, as long as everything is working on this beautiful AT&T hotspot, it should all work. So let's see. I don't trust conference Wi-Fi. That's what happens after doing this 100 times. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to spend $20 a month on 2 gigs of data, which is the biggest ripoff ever, but I'm doing it. Yeah. All right, so it's building up the application, and now we have the iPhone simulator. I'm just running it on a 5S. Now we can run this side by side. Monkey chat. And again, this is all shared user interface, everything that's shared backend. So we can see we're getting the similar look and feel. I'm just going to go ahead and connect here on both iOS and Android. And you're getting the same look and feel of the platform like you would expect. And we're both going to join general. It pushes that page across. Nothing has quite happened yet, so I'll say hello there. Hit send. Uh-oh. There we go. Oh, I've sent it multiple times. That's good. All right. Hey. Hit send. There we go. Now we're getting it back in real time. Awesome. I can't believe this works. That was the first thing that I said when I actually did this in about, I don't know, an hour. It took me to set up and do this entire application, which is really powerful. So now I get the scroll, I get everything I want, and this is the different cells that I'm getting. So I get a blue cell from the other user and everything like that. So I would say, whoa, you should clap. That's pretty cool. So I wrote a little bit of code on iOS and a little bit of code on Android because that's where the SDK is, right? How much time do I got left? Loads of time. That's perfect because I'm not done. That's right. Because you're like, James, that's a cool demo, and you're like a little bit of abstraction, and about 90% of my code at this point is shared. And this is a very small application. I can continue to build it out as it goes on. This is pretty cool. So let's actually stop these applications and let me talk to you about something extremely powerful to actually add some more functionality into this application. So I'm going to go and close these applications. There we go. And come back to my slide deck really quick. Because what happens here, so I added the Twilio SDK for iOS and Android, and that's some native functionality because it's the native APIs. But what else is kind of living up in this thing, up in here? We wrote a little bit of Twilio code just to bubble it up to our shared code base. What else lives there? Well, not only does your Twilio code live there, but other things like battery, GPS, lights, notifications, things that are almost exactly the same between the different platforms, but they have different APIs. Now, in the case of Twilio, we haven't abstracted anything away yet. We created our own little abstraction. But Xamarin's been around for a long time. Like I said, I've written about 70 applications, and I got sick of writing all of this code over and over and over again. So what I thought would be cool is, what if I wanted to maybe spice up and share these monkeys' locations with the locations? Or maybe I wanted to speak back the physical texts that are coming in. Because what if you guys didn't have to write all this code, but you could access all this native functionality from the shared code? That'd be very powerful. For instance, you want to speak. You want to just say, speak, hello world. And under the hood, that should automatically call AV speech synthesizer, text to speech, and the speech synthesizer APIs on iOS, Android, and all the Windows platforms. You shouldn't have to go and worry about that. So we did that for about 50 or 60 of the different APIs across iOS, Android, and Windows. We call them plugins for Xamarin. They're extremely powerful to add this rich native functionality without having to go learn all that native functionality. You can get to them at github.com/Xamarin/plugins because they're all open source. They're built by tons of awesome Xamarin such as myself, but also tons of you developers that are building and sharing applications. Thanks for giving me time on this tiny little screen. Perfect, Phil. Appreciate that. So let's go ahead and share some of these monkeys' locations. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up and we have our NuGet package manager. Now, I sneakily enough added some of these plugins ahead of time. I actually installed the Xamarin plugin for device information, and we actually go into our Twilio Helper here. We can see I'm actually using it right here. Instead of having to go find the iOS or the Android device-specific ID, I just say, I don't know, give me the ID, and it's like, cool, I got you. Then what I did also is I installed the permissions plugin, and also down here the geolocator plugin, and those fancy circle images, a plugin. So here's the geolocator plugin. Let's actually go ahead and and take a look here, and we can see that there's a project URL, and there's this guy here. He seems trustworthy, so we're obviously install his stuff. But let's check him out. Installing a new gets like the Wild West, so let's go ahead and install this. And we can see here we have my plugins. I have a whole bunch of stuff in here. There's a lot of stars, but let's go ahead and check out that developer himself. Just really make sure he's trustworthy. Adorable. So we trust him. And he has 989 followers, almost as much as John Skeet, which is pretty cool. Been really trying to beat him. Hint, hint, maybe follow me. And you can see he pushes a lot of code. So cool, we trust me. But let's look at this API. I'm going to go into my geolocator, and here we go. I scroll down. I support iOS, Android, Windows, all the different Windows platforms. And here's the code. Locator.getPositionAsync as a timeout. Get the timestamp, latitude, longitude. I can subscribe to different notifications. I can get errors. I can get location. I can get heading. If I can do background notifications, everything. So let's go ahead and integrate this into the application. So I'm going to go back into my main chat, so where my chat is at. So I have the send command that's sending some text messages. Down here, I was sneaky. I already added this. So what I did here is I said, you know what, I'm going to have another command called location command. And the first thing that we'll do is I'm going to say cross geolocator, get the current position, timeout after 10 seconds, and then create a new message where I'm passing the map URL. So I'm using a Google API just to create a static map off the latitude and longitude here. So just pass it all back there with some string interpolation. And then I just simply pass that over to Twilio. Now I don't know what the best way of handling this is, so I appended it with attach. That seemed okay to me. And then I'm going to go ahead and parse that out when a message comes up on the other user's device. So let's add this into our user interface, and of course we're going to do that in shared code. So I'm going to add a toolbar item. So I'll say toolbar or content page dot toolbar items. I'm going to create a toolbar item, maybe. There we go. I'll say text, and I'll say location. And then I'm going to do a command here. I'm going to say binding location command. There we go. And that should work. Let's go ahead and build it up, make sure I spelled everything correct. So when I tap that, it's going to call my shared code, which is automatically going to get my location and share it. So let's set Android as my startup. I'm just going to go ahead and build this really quick, and we'll run it on both again. There we go. Let's switch back over here to iOS. Set that as my startup. Again, I'm not touching any of that specific code, but I am going in and just changing the shared code. So let's do this again here. Let's connect this guy up. Join general. There we go. Now we're relaunching our iOS application. There we go. Boom. One thing I'm going to do over here on iOS is make sure I have a location. We'll set it as the Apple startup here. There we go. I'll go ahead and connect here to general again. There we go. I actually get a little toast over here on Android saying that I've joined. So I can come over here and I can say hello. I can send that again. Hey, keep sending multiple ones. Send is going. It's taking some time. That's good. Oh, something has happened. Whoa. All right, it's very upset with me. Break. Live debugging. Hello. General channel. All right, we'll just launch it again. Android works. That's cool. I can come over to my backend browser. I'm over here and I can say, see if this will connect up. It's good. Cool, that's good. Let's try iOS again here. There's my little test server running over here. Joining session. Someone joined. Hey. Like when it works and then doesn't work, we'll say location. That's good. The location comes up, it's sharing. For some reason, iOS is throwing some null reference exception, so that's great when it just worked a second ago. Rest assured, it totally works. Awesome. You can download this code. It's all finished in its working state. I do like that. We'll try to get you ship it. That's what I say. I like that. Let's see if I can just get location. That work? Oh no. Perfect. A little null reference exception from something. Interestingly enough, let's try it again. Yeah. It happens. It happens. Hashtag doing it live. There we go. Well, we all know that there's a null reference exception, so we'll just assume that it totally worked. And you're like, whoa, cool, and now everything's synced up across the board. That's great. Awesome. Very strange. Very strange indeed. We'll blame, you know, being outside. Cool. Let's see if we'll give it one more go. I have like 2 minutes, so perfect. We'll give it one more go. Or I'm 2 minutes over, one or the other. I'm at 0. Phil says I'm over. You know, what are you going to do? Yeah. Cool. Let's try it one more time, just in case. Ugh, totally works on Android. Almost. All right. It's totally there. It totally works. Yeah. Cool. So, there we go. Null reference exception. So, if you want to get started, head over to Xamarin.com, learn all of our documentation, everything's there. And with that, I'll be hanging around, I'll have lunch with you guys, and thank you so much.